An essential Quaker belief is the uniqueness of every person's spiritual experience, and that this experience does not need the mediation of clergy. Quakers do not subscribe to a formal creed. However, collective experience and understanding are seen as being as important as individual experience. So Quakers do worship and act together. The testimonies are an expression of that collective and evolving understanding. At the end of the lecture, there will be time for questions. And if those who are online would like to ask questions, please put them into the chat in Zoom. Then for those who are in person, you're invited to join us for social time and refreshments. And copies of the companion booklet for this lecture will be available for sale after the lecture. Now I'm delighted to introduce the lecture and welcome all of our presenters here with me. The lecture this year is entitled A Queer Gift, Stepping Beyond the Mindset, and is presented and written by members of our Rainbow Quaker group, a network of LGBTQIA+ Quakers in Aotearoa, New Zealand. These writings represent the lived experience and individual understandings of the authors, and as such are personal and can only represent a small window into the wisdom, lives, and experience of LGBTQIA+ Quakers. I would like to acknowledge the courage and generosity of our presenters in being willing to share their personal journeys with us. We hope this presentation and the publication of the companion booklet to the 2024 Quaker Lecture encourages further discussion on the inclusion in our wider society of those who identify as LGBTQIA+. At the end of the lecture presentations, we ask you to acknowledge our presenters by moving into a time of silence. And I invite you all now to move into a time of silence, or silent worship, as Quakers would say, and our presenters will speak into the silence.
Ena mana, ena reo, ena ho, hawe wha, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko te mea nui, e hanore ki te ronga rawa, te atua atawhai. Rangi nui I tuana tēnā koe. Papatu nuku I tapu nei tēnā koe. Tainui te mana whenua tēnā koutou ihi mai. E te kapuia riki koutou ko te hapore o te kingetanga tēnā koutou katoa. I recognize that we gather here on the land of Waikato, and I honor the people who hold mana here. Also, I recognize and honor the younger friends who have taught us much as we've developed this lecture, but for various reasons are not able to join in this presentation. We hold them in our hearts. If we lived in Ghana, should the current law proposed this February go through, we could only have this meeting in complete secrecy. If we were discovered, everyone in this room would be liable for up to 5 years in prison. Not only that, but the stigma attached to anyone either part of the LGBTQIA plus community or anyone like yourselves seem to be supporting such undesirables would remain for the rest of your lives. The law is at present being held back by the threat to withdraw financial support by the World Bank. In Sudan, a first offence will bring 500 lashes and 5 years in prison. A third offence is life imprisonment or the death penalty. If your clothes violate public decency, it's 40 lashes and a fine. Avaz had a petition out in 2023 due to the way queer people are being treated in Uganda. For years, Russian authorities tried to erase LGBTQ plus visibility, and now they've criminalised it, said Tanya Lokshina, Associate Europe and Central Asia Director at Human Rights Watch. New Zealand is the 24th safest country out of 203, according to the LGBTQ plus Travel Safety Index. In 2023, Lonely Planet rated New Zealand 4th on its list of the most gay-friendly places on the planet. Despite this, UNICEF tells us that we have the second highest rate of youth suicide in the developed world. Did you know that if you're LGBTQIA+, the suicide rate is 1 in 5, compared to 1 in 20 if you're straight? LGBTQIA students are more likely to be bullied at school, and this is more prevalent for trans youth. Lesbian or gay adults will experience more than double the rate of sexual violence from their partners at 33%, compared to an average of 16% across all of Aotearoa. When looking at queer history, what seems remarkable is the repetition of ostracism, othering, hatred, and in some parts of the world, attempts to wipe out the newest or latest iteration of the rainbow community. Each letter of the LGBTQIA+ title has had to withstand to varying degrees condemnation, bullying, and violence. How do we open our hearts to the difficult journeys some have had to be able to live the authentic life that some of us take for granted? To help our wider communities to accept all the rainbow community for who they are.
Birds do it. Bees do it. Even educated fleas do it. Let's do it. Let's. Well, it's fall in love. But all this doing it, well, it's also about making love, having sexual relations. Was Ella Fitzgerald singing just about heterosexuals, about heterosexual bees and birds? Was Mr. Porter only writing about a majority that he wasn't part of? Most people will accept that same-sex attraction, romance, sexual activity, and love have been around since the year dot. Not just for us who regard ourselves as the superior earthling, but in the whole of the animal kingdom. Equally, non-conformity to culturally or socially prescribed gender roles goes back to the beginning of recorded history. Prominent figures in history, such as Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Tchaikovsky, Alan Turing, Florence Nightingale, Eleanor Roosevelt, Virginia Woolf, and Sally Ride, are well recorded for their homosexual proclivities and activity. 126 of Shakespeare's sonnets were written to a man. If they were all at it, you can be sure hoi polloi were at it too. Yet over many centuries, there's been developed such antagonism, even violence to, and suppression of, let's call it, queerness. That is, non-normative sexual attraction, intercourse, and gender identity. Religious disapproval has been the cause of serious oppression, ostracism, condemnation, and punishment, including death. It's hanging or hell. This is particularly so when we come to the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. In this 21st century, with our knowledge and experience of human diversity, spirituality, and the depths of expression of love and sexuality that are so life-affirming and creative, is it feasible to seek for life guidance from ancient texts, those same texts that enforce the subjugation of women and the acceptance of slavery? Modern regimes don't all rely on religious texts to commit their horrific expression of the rainbow community. Today, of 193 United Nations member jurisdictions, in 1/3, 64, consensual same-sex acts are criminalized or oppressed. Egregious examples include Russia, Ghana, Kenya, and Iran, and recently Uganda. Despite there being a large Quaker community in East Africa and West Africa, in no way could we be Quakers there. Queer people, even in New Zealand, are under attack, constant attack, and there is some detail of this in the companion booklet. For many heterosexual people, bisexuality and homosexuality is just about sex. And even that it's a choice. My parents saw it as such when I came out to them at 19. My father told me to cut it out and leave home. My mother asked, is it a phase? And to reduce tension at home, I said that it was. but within months I left my home in the Yorkshire moors for the delights and freedoms of London and then Toronto. Years later, my parents admitted to their lack of knowledge, their ignorance, and apologised. They accepted my boyfriends, realising that it was about love and romance. In 2005, the two mothers were the witnesses at our civil partnership ceremony, which was converted in 2014 to full marriage. Finally, after 21 years together, we could feel the wonderful warmth of being called and calling each other husbands. My father said he wouldn't have missed it for the world. And think how much love queer kids growing up have lost, robbed of experiencing the innocence of early teenage love, instead spending all their time on mastering pretense. Recently, a friend, a fellow Quaker even, when I said sexuality wasn't a choice, explained, yes it is. What? Really? Would you choose to be ostracized, vilified, to be considered dirty, sick, perverted, against God, and be subject to not just to vile name calling, but also blackmail, loss of job, violence, imprisonment, execution, and of course, therapy? So what makes a person homosexual? Do we really need to know? There are scientific theories that it is caused by a mixture of genetic, hormonal, and environmental influences. It is no longer considered a psychological illness, thank goodness. There is no scientific view that homosexuality is a choice. Research indicates that homosexuality is a normal and natural variation of human sexuality. There is no justification, therefore, in attempts to change sexual orientation. On the contrary, attempts to do so are likely to cause psychological harm and mental illness. In February 2022, New Zealand passed by a vote of 112 to 8 a bill banning conversion therapy as a dangerous and discredited practice. I am fortunate that no one ever tried or suggested conversion. I am fortunate that whatever the law said when I was young, I never felt my feelings for males were wrong, despite knowing that I was thought to be disgusting and dirty by mainstream society. For me, it was simply like custard donuts, naughty but nice. I'm fortunate that over the years, I've only been spat at, had bricks and coins thrown at me, had names called, had violence threatened, lost friendships, and been refused employment because of my sexuality. And I'm so fortunate that I've had and have so much support from Quaker friends, friends, family, acquaintances, strangers, and legal changes and protections. But as a youth and young man, I was subject to enormous pressure to conform to what was considered socially desirable, first under pressure of illegality and later of being accepted into normal society. In the early 1980s, in Colchester Quaker meeting house in England, which rented out a room for meetings of the Campaign for Homosexual Equality, I came across the booklet Towards a Quaker View of Sex, issued by a Britain Yearly Meeting in 1963, 4 years before partial homosexual law reform in England and Wales. Imagine how I felt that here was a religion looking at sexual development and, lo and behold, in relation to the range of homosexual behaviour and relationships, pointing out that society had said that the relationship didn't matter, it was the sexual act that did. However, they came down on the side of relationships, indeed about love. And I quote, "An act which expresses true affection between two individuals and gives pleasure to them both does not seem to us to be sinful by reason alone of the fact that it is homosexual. The act should be judged by the same criterion as heterosexual relationship. It wasn't considered promiscuity, it wasn't condoning promiscuity, but supporting loving relationships." Since then, there's been a gradual change of mindset. Nevertheless, painfully, questions of sexuality and sexual morality continue to divide Quakers. Friends who look to the authority of the Bible as God's revelation, especially in the United States and Africa, reject liberal Quakers' attitude to homosexuality and gender. For them, we could never be Quakers. What is the threat? There are estimates that approximately about 4 to 7% are attracted mainly to their own gender. About 4% equally to both. And between 1 and 2% identify as non-binary or transgender. That totals more or less the same as people who are left-handed. I'm blessed to be both left-handed and gay. However, my natural left-handedness isn't seen as a threat, but my natural queerness is. A number of studies and scientific research have tried to establish what is behind or the cause of negative attitudes to queerness, that is, homophobia, finding consistent patterns for being older or being less educated, to the negative attitude of peers or parents, and of course, people more likely to attend church frequently and to subscribe to conservative theology. Psychoanalytic research has identified the additional explanation to homophobia, that is, anxiety based on a person's own uncertainty about their sexuality, or some fantasy that queerness might be catchy. If homosexuality is catchy, then heterosexuality must be catchy. Clearly, many millions of queer people have natural immunity. We believe that knowledge of our lives' experiences will help your journey to seeing as no threat and will allow you to have greater freedom to question imposed social norms, whether it's the silliness of blue for boy, pink for a girl, or the profundity of sexual and gender expression. The loving expression of who we are within our close relationships isn't something to be despised or feared, but celebrated. We are no threat.
Good evening, friends. I've called my piece Finding My Home. I look back and I know I was always different. I was born to a 15-year-old girl in Britain at the tail end of the Second World War. I was taken from my large extended family and put into a children's home at a year old. And from there to various foster homes, which I rejected. I realise now that I was looking for my big family and they weren't it. I was long-term fostered and eventually adopted by an older couple who became my mum and dad. They made me understand as I grew older that I should be grateful to them for caring for me because I had ruined my mother's life and I had bad blood, whatever that meant. I was and I still am grateful to them for giving me stability and for bringing me to New Zealand. But being tolerated rather than loved was intolerable to me, and my behaviour reflected that. A fact which I am sad about now is they were good people doing their best for a volatile child that they didn't understand. This early life meant I had low self-esteem and depression that dogged my life. I look back and see that the whole adoption system is on a par with racism and colonialism, through being seen as lesser and therefore needing an intervention from someone who had power and made decisions, usually a white man. The system was essentially damaging, and those who have been through it spend a lot of their lives coming to grips with it. When I was taken out of England to New Zealand, my natural mother was not informed, as this was deemed unnecessary. It took the family nearly 60 years to find me and reunite me with my birth family. During my teens, there was some exploration with both girls and boys. Mum was asexual and didn't understand what drove me and couldn't guide me. What I felt was her disapproval and was being seen as like my birth mother and definitely no good. At 17, I became pregnant and got married because that's what you did. My young husband was a good man with a very strong work ethic, and we were married for 14 years. This time was spent rearing our two sons. I had to deal with illness and deepening depression, a sense of emptiness and a feeling of, is this all there is? I left the marriage, sorry, I got lost. I felt worthless as a wife and mother, and after 14 years, I left the marriage. During this time, there was a growing confusion in me about how I felt about a woman friend in my life. Looking back, I realised that my relationships with women had lesbian overtones, and that the poetry I wrote back then was lesbian erotic. It didn't enter my head. I entered into my second relationship with a man that brought me adventure and community living, which in some ways gave me back my big family. Though living in community was challenging, I value those years for the freedom they brought to examine my attitudes. And they brought peace and a feeling of being loved for myself. we were married for over 20 years. Quakers came into my life during this marriage and also a beginning understanding of feminism, a very radical concept for me. I started volunteering at Women's Centre and embraced a whole new set of ideas and thinking. Not easy at all for my husband, who had to remind me sometimes that he was not the enemy. I was in therapy for a lot of that time as depression was still with me. When the 9/11 attack on New York happened, I was profoundly affected and realised that life could be cut off in a blink. And what hadn't I done with my life that I needed to do? This resulted in a massive re-evaluation of my life. And I came out, which wasn't so hard as my friends and family had already worked out where I was at. I was the last, I think, to cotton on there. I left my second marriage with acceptance and love from my husband. I entered into a lesbian relationship with a long-term friend, which was a joy to me and made me realise how little I understood about being a lesbian, even though I had read widely. I felt I carried the conditioning of my younger years and the mindset of being heterosexual for so long. I don't think I had much idea of what an equal partnership was about. I felt very much that I wasn't good enough, loving enough, or authentic enough for my partner. When she was diagnosed with dementia, the relationship deteriorated over the next several years. Sadly, we parted with her going into care and me going to live with my eldest son and his wife and family in the bush. I look on this relationship as pivotal to affirming me as a person and as a lesbian. Quakerism underpinned my spirituality through all these years and was supportive, though I rarely shared how deeply my lesbianism permeates my life and my spirituality. Rainbow Quakers has become a place to stand and be able to share and become aware of the variations in our rainbow family. Understanding and seeing these differences as real people, being authentic and sharing their struggles in life has been a revelation to me. It has shown me how repressive it can be, continually being among straight people, even the most loving of them, when you are fundamentally different. I was recently asked how long it was since I'd been in a gay relationship. And when I said going on 8 years, it was suggested that I probably wasn't lesbian anymore, as if celibacy changed who I identified as. I see this lack of understanding as typical of thinking in a largely heterosexual world. Quakers as a society have done a great deal to welcome and integrate queer people, and it hasn't always been easy for them. But we have a real commitment through the Rainbow Statement to understand the differences in sexual orientation and the needs of our community. Our advices and queries prompt us to honour that of God in all people. This is a calling from the divine to see the diversity of gifts that we bring to the world through our differences in gender orientation and sexuality, and sharing who we are spiritually. Quakers helps us to ground that spirituality in tradition and to seek guidance where we need to. There are still times, however, when heteronormative members of the society have made decisions for us without feeling the need to consult us. This is hurtful and triggers anger from previously feeling unseen and unheard. There is work to be done there. The society seeks to understand the needs of all its members, be they aged, disabled, rainbow, heterosexual, or racially different. This obliges us to dive deep in the spirit and seek to understand our relationships with each other through the lens of love and light and acceptance, no matter how difficult that may be at times. This brings us a joyful recognition of all in creation and our place in it. We journey on together.
Fear, polarisation and mass formation. We live in very polarised times. If you name any issue, you can find examples of polarisation. The media often exacerbate this by leaving out certain facts and using emotive language. This can and often does lead to topics becoming fraught with pejorative terms, which disclose biases and prejudices of the individual speaking. Use of certain terms or names in a conversation and open dialogue is wrecked due to prejudice, judgment, and fear. Polarisation can be fueled by the illusory effect, first identified in a study in 1977. This is a tendency to believe false information to be correct after repeated exposure. Assessing truth, people rely on whether the information aligns with their understanding or feels familiar. Repetition makes statements easier to process relative to new, unrepeated statements, leading people to believe that the repeated conclusion is more truthful. This effect has also been linked to hindsight bias, in which the recollection of confidence is skewed after the truth has been received. In 2015, in a 2015 study, researchers discovered that familiarity can overpower rationality, and that repetitively hearing that a certain statement is wrong can paradoxically cause it to feel right. Researchers attributed the illusory truth effect's impact even on participants who knew the correct answer to begin with, but were persuaded to believe otherwise through the repetition of a falsehood, to processing fluency. As the song in South Pacific says, you've got to be carefully taught. So why is it important to address polarisation? Polarisation gets us focusing on the symptom rather than the underlying problem, and causes inertia. The unacceptable answers on both sides of the polarisation seem to cause the unacceptableness to be transferred onto the people espousing that view. It also makes people open to manipulation and takes us away from the creative third way of collaborating over finding a solution to a seemingly intractable situation. How do we combat polarisation? Charles Eisenstein speaks of us needing to engage with a deep healing work, a work of unlearning the psychological habits of polarisation, and of hearing and sharing the stories that disrupt polarising narratives. He goes on to say, it is about making space for complexity and relativistic thinking. It's about noticing the hidden motivations within ourselves that polarised identification serves. The practice that helps to resolve polarisation is empathy with perspective. Empathy for the in-group contributes to fueling polarisation. Empathy for the minority group with perspective sets up the potential for creative and loving communication. There are times in our lives when the very core of our being is threatened, when overwhelmed by fear, any information can bypass our rational minds and the filters of discernment. When this happens to a large group, and this phenomenon has been known to affect whole countries and beyond, psychology has recognized this as a state of mass formation. When this happens, trying to change the understanding doesn't happen through logical reasoning. The only practice that has been shown to make a difference is Socratic questioning, a method of inquiry that seeks to explore complex ideas, concepts, and beliefs by asking questions that challenge assumptions, clarify meaning, and reveal underlying principles. What has all this got to do with LGBTQ+ issues? If we were back in the 70s in New Zealand, it would be the issue of gay liberation. Here and now, it is the issue of trans rights. Even within the rainbow population, there is a polarisation between more marginalised and less marginalised queers. How open are we to considering that our opinions may be based on false information?
Key psychosocial cultural considerations in terms of LGBTQIA+B. We share the same ground of being. If we are born of Taka Tapui, LGBTQIA+ rainbow culture, our ground of being is the same. We are different, but we share the same ground of being. Thich Nhat Hanh, Zen Buddhist teacher, France, Vietnam. It is our birthright, as for all human beings, for reasons of sexual orientation, as well as for those of gender, race, class, different ability, age, religion, spirituality, divinity, mysticism, to be unconditionally recognized, nurtured, affirmed, and encouraged to live the potential of their humanity. I want to propose that our society and culture is based on racism, sexism, misogyny, heterosexism, homophobia, and transphobia. And subsequently, we have been conditioned and enculturated into perpetuating these mindsets to varying degrees. A common phrase is, "I'm not a racist." And my private response is, not even a tiny little bit. Even I, as a rainbow man, am homophobic and transphobic to varying degrees, leave alone racist, sexist, misogynistic, and heterosexist. Are you also just a tiny little bit? When you look at the ocean, we see different kinds of waves, many sizes and shapes, but all waves have water as their foundation and substance. Thich Nhat Hanh, 2009. Are we willing to see many different types of waves, not only of LGBTQIA+ people, but also the intersectionalities of human beings affected by race, gender, different ability, age, class, and other religions, spiritualities, etc. Around 3.5 years of age, my innocence was attracted to a male chest while out on a family picnic. Why did this innocence of a child become a conspiracy of silence and criminality for some 25 years? Together with developing stress, anxiety, burnout, and then panic attacks. Key considerations in terms of LGBTQIA+ people are: number one, developmental, organizational, maturational. From the moment of conception and/or as an embryo or infant, we are energetically exposed to the dualism of a boy-girl dichotomy from our mother community. Are you having a girl or a boy? We grow up in a family socio-cultural system wherein a parent may be secretive about their own sexual orientation and thereby perpetuate their own heterosexism, homophobia, transphobia onto a developing child, a young adult. In 2023, in my 73rd year, I now consider that a photo of my father in 1943 in the family album before my parents got married was more than just a party trick, but a portrayal of a sophisticated cross-dresser and presumably homosexual, while outwardly maintaining a family homeostasis and adhering to a faith in the Roman Catholic Church for support and redemption. From as young as early childhood onwards, our sense of self may be confused with, perceived as, and linked to paedophilia, blackmail, murder, be vulnerable to indiscriminate police harassment, and meet generalized discrimination, e.g. employment and education. 1971, a Christian associate teacher required me to teach the whole class instead of just a group, so that I would fail my teacher training within Waikato University. Do you remember the fervency of the Salvation Army during those years of homosexual law reform? I have since had a career in special education and then guide dogs long cane travel from early childhood through to elderhood. We may also need to be under the radar and self-monitoring, may be considered unnatural, dirty, linked to bestiality, as if we were somehow more animal than human. And maybe somehow a girl or a tomboy. 1954, 1957. After somatically sensing my innocence at around 3.5 years of age, I was psychosocially aware of my difference, come otherness, by 7 years of age, and thereby living 2 lives, a public primary school life in Blenheim of all places, and a private world. Number 2, narratives and languaging. There is an inherent sociocultural dis-ease, discomfort around perception, sexuality per se in our society. It is deleted, and/or there is an absence of healthy and robust narrative and languaging for all people, leave alone LGBTQIA+. Number 3, belonging and other. From early childhood to senior years, LGBTQIA+ people are continually renegotiating their interactions, outness, sense of belonging within heteronormative majority organizations and groups. They meet theologies in such a way as to ignore and even question the religio-spiritual integrity of LGBTQIA+ people. Can we all be celebrated, belong, and feel loved? Let us all be bathed in an unconditional and universal light. My divinity is of my somatic base chakra, body, heart, and brain mind, living and breathing from within a light of innocence as a baby child. Our only prerogative is unconditional, positive regard.
I came to Quakers about 1980 as a result of an advert in the Open University newspaper. For those who like puns, it's called Sesame. Once I'd opened Sesame, I found this advert, sent for the book, and devoured George Gorman's Introducing Quakers, and followed up with a revolutionary Towards a Quaker View of Sex. I hope it came in a brown envelope, because I wouldn't have liked anything to out me in those days. Although comfortable with Quakers, after 10 years, not out, I was still wondering exactly what it was that had inspired early Quakers with such courage and a willingness to be even cheerfully imprisoned in the disgusting filth of 17th century jails for their faith. Die even. Oh, for that courage. That question stuck with me largely unconsciously. Where did they get their courage from? What I now know is that questions always have a way of being answered, although the answers may not always be what we want to hear. I've been running what had become a very successful small business with a partner since 1973, but now there was something tugging me towards this answer. By 1990, it was agonizingly clear that it meant leaving my partner of 20 years, a comfortable income and fulfilling work. It meant living in a group in cramped conditions, sleeping on the floor, one toilet, 9 people. It meant being well out of my comfort zone. Our mission was to find new light. In spite of the privations, it enabled me to begin finding my own answers, and more importantly, to discover the source of those answers. It enabled me to feel brave enough to come out to my parents. I was 47 and had been living a double life all that time, for at least 30 years. And as I'd feared, they were not overly joyous about it. Dad was obviously disappointed and died a few months later. My ex-partner says that if I hadn't come out, he wouldn't have died. Mum said she was glad I hadn't told them earlier. Fast forward through a very difficult 5-year relationship to moving in with Mother, now in her 90s, and coming back to Quakers in another part of the country. This is Britain. After a few months, we did a course called Hearts and Minds Prepared, an excellent course actually. To my great joy, I discovered in my 15-year absence from Quakers, Rex Ambler had done his deep dive into what I now consider to be at least the approximation of the foundation of the Quaker way. I devoured his little book, Like to Live By, and became very excited. I'm easily excited, friends. From my work in the group, I knew exactly what I was looking for, how it felt, and what it meant. Shortly after the introductory weekend at Swarthmore Hall, which is a real privilege, with Rex and his wife Catherine, when we'd established a bit later a light group in our meeting, I had the profound experience of knowing that in spite of what I've always perceived as my shortcomings, my wickedness in my sexuality, maybe because of them, I am in fact much loved. It was a life-changing experience which encompassed the whole of me, including my sexuality. It was the beginning of a whole new chapter in my journey towards authenticity, when I finally loved myself enough to be open to the wonderful relationship I now enjoy with this woman. There's no fear of expressing the love we have for each other and enabling that love to ripple out to all those we meet. My mum was initially horrified when I finally came out. Sometime later, when I asked how she would feel if I had another relationship, she said, I wouldn't condemn it outright. Some 20 years later, by the time Val and I were planning our Mad Hatters tea party after our wonderful meeting for worship for marriage, for the evening celebration, Mum complained that she hated hats because she had such a short neck. I suggested we make her a fascinator. That's one of those little jobs with bows and everything on. And quick as a flash, her 98 years of age, not dimming her wit one whit, she said, you better be careful, I might fascinate Val. It was a long journey for her, and I honour her for making it. I'm immensely grateful to Quakers for their original enlightened work on recognising the spiritual validity of same-sex relationships. In another instance, I have been told that I couldn't be a lesbian and spiritual. That's in the book. It was not without its challenges in society either. There were casualties of those who were unable to come to terms with the idea in any shape or form. I had the privilege to be in Britain at the yearly meeting in 2009 when the concern about our endorsement of same-sex marriage was before us. As the final minute was read to the 1,000 plus people in the room, and any further ministry was invited, there was a profound silence. No one had anything to add or change. Even now, the recollection makes me speechless, brings tears to my eyes. May our journey towards acceptance of each other's authentic and vibrant selves continue, holding one another up with a tender hand and getting to know one another in the things that are eternal. There is no finer foundation for a loving and peaceful world.
Good evening. Recently, Joy and I were at a lunch gathering of lesbian couples. Between courses, someone suggested that each couple should tell the story of how they got together. What fun! Ours seemed a modest story, as these things go, until I told how at the first summer gathering we attended as a couple, Friends actually supported our relationship and encouraged it. You mean your church actually supported your relationship?
It seems incredible. Those comments came from women whose faith communities had not been at all supportive. And as I read of experiences of some women within mainstream churches, appreciation and gratitude for our experience fills my head and heart.
We met at the Quaker settlement, where Joy was living, and I attended lesbian weekends. We were both 70 years old when we went to that first summer gathering at Blue Skies near Christchurch. Joy soon moved to Hamilton to share the women's house that I had lived in for several years. We both attended the Hamilton worship group here in this building and shared the role of co-clerks for the Waikato Hauraki monthly meeting.
Our move to Tauranga coincided with the rearrangement of the monthly meetings. Mid-North Island monthly meeting was formed to include Hamilton, Tauranga, Thames, Rotorua, and Whakatane. We were appointed to serve as co-clerks of the new monthly meeting. At the same time, we were newcomers to the Tauranga worship group. We soon belonged.
Early in 2013, the law allowing same-gender marriage was passed. In November of that year, we married in the Welcome Bay Community Centre in the presence of family from several countries and friends who had travelled from all over this one. There were some of my family who were unwilling to attend. Ours was the first same-gender marriage among friends in Aotearoa. It was a wonderful wedding, and some of you people were there helping us. And we are deeply grateful to be members of a faith community that was willing and able to support two old women in our desire to marry.
Last November, now in our mid-80s, long retired from co-clerking, we celebrated our 10th wedding anniversary. All those in Mary Rose's family who had been unwilling to attend our wedding came to celebrate our 10th anniversary. Two old women caring for each other, supported by and serving in our faith community.
Isn't that what love can do?
Harongia is my mama. The mighty Waikato is my awa. The land beneath us was farmland as I grew up, 10 minutes walk along from here, along a gravelled hillcrest road. I felt I had to be a good girl, which I now see probably held me back from identifying as a lesbian girl. I came into Quakerism and feminism about the same time. Each supported the other. From my feminism, I became aware of my lesbian identity in 1990, but was closeted at Quakers for the next 2 years. After I came out in my meeting, I was asked by a Quaker if I was in a relationship. When I answered negatively, the response was, therefore it didn't matter that I was a lesbian. This level of limited tolerance was what had kept me in the closet. After finding out I was lesbian, my stepmother cut me off. I did not know why I was out in the cold and never received helpful responses when I asked other family members. I was precluded from much of the preparation and arrangements for my father's funeral because of her homophobia. A newspaper for lesbian and gays, Quaker lesbian and gays, it was started by James Stewart in the late 1980s. Later, Jan Marsh produced it for many years. This contact with other Quakers helped me. I coordinated Friends for Gay and Lesbian Concerns, FGLC, for a number of years, initially with John Goody. We had informal meetings at yearly meetings and summer gatherings, as well as producing the Friends for Lesbian and Gay Concerns newsletter. After Jan laid down producing it. Yearly meeting paid for the photography and postage of the newsletter. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, Methodists and some Aotearoa churches were becoming reconciling congregations, which was about reconciling differences so they could be supportive of gays and lesbians. The needed monthly meeting presented a paper at yearly meeting, which led to the Statement of Affirmation and Reconciliation. About a year later, Phyllis Short, who was the yearly meeting clerk in 1992, said to me that she regretted that yearly meeting had accepted the statement without looking at what it meant to be a reconciling congregation. Quakers were the only church which nationally supported the Civil Union Act in 2004 and the Marriage Act in 2013. This support included making oral submissions to the select committees. Friends for Gay and Lesbian Concerns went into recess during 2013 as agreed via the yearly meeting clerk's letter. The group, now more diverse in rainbow identities, was revived in 2023. This was prompted by young friends who experienced the need for Quakers and meetings to be open and supportive of the range of people with non-heterosexual identities coming to Quakers. Subsequently, a group of Rainbow Quakers worked on the statement, Walking in the Light Under the Rainbow. This statement was accepted by yearly meeting in 2023. During the process, some comments from meetings showed a lack of awareness of the realities of our lives or conditional acceptance. Also, two of us became aware of how we have modified our behaviour to fit in with the Quaker group expectations. This involves censoring what I choose to share, but also find that seldom do people ask how it is for me as a lesbian. Do they really not want to hear, or does it not occur to them that there may be differences? I am left wondering how much of this comes from me and how much from the group's expectations. I suspect it's some of each. At Rainbow Quaker weekends, there's a different feel. Here we have been able to share our hurts, and often we identify with parts of others' stories. We know we have been truly heard. I am very grateful for Quakers' support for civil unions and same-sex marriage. This was especially so for Elizabeth and my spiritual and civil union in the manner of Friends, and thanks to those that attended it who are here. This was a spirit-led, delightful celebration. We were legally not allowed to call it marriage. When the law came in allowing same-sex marriage, we would have had to pay again for a license. And I objected to that. I'm very grateful to the brave lesbians and gays who worked so hard to get legal acceptance we have today. I look forward to Quakers being able to walk cheerfully, responding to our rainbows.
I'm reading this on behalf of Helena Eriksson, with her permission, a Wellington Quaker rainbow friend, who is a proud transgender woman. It's called Concept of Natural. Something that humans have struggled with for as long as we exist is that we can't understand ourselves from an objective point of view. We constantly evade categorization, and it's impossible to say exactly who we are, what we do, and what things really define us without hours and hours of caveats. Through history, there are many, often horrifying attempts at defining the essential man. Some were kings, some religious leaders, some dictators. The common through line is the idea that there is a natural state of being for humans, and everything that deviates from that is just pollution and can be excluded from our understanding of ourselves. As Quakers, we don't believe in a prescribed relationship with the divine. We believe in giving the space for each person to understand themselves and their own conception of their fundamental being and their own relationship with God and godliness. God does not give us a mold to fill. I think this is one of the most important aspects of our faith. Still, we are human, and we're not immune to this dichotomy of thinking. What is a trait and what is a mutation? What is behavior and what is mental illness? Humans evade rigidity to such a degree that we often define nature as anything that comes to be without human intervention. Yet we often look to nature to understand ourselves, and for this reason, the once widespread belief that homosexuality only existed in humans led to laws against homosexual intercourse and to centre on the idea that it was a crime against nature. So in 1977, when ornithologists George and Mary Hunt happened upon an island where 10% of seagull nests had 6 eggs, rather than the usual 3, the discovery of lesbian seagulls set in motion the toppling of anti-sodomy laws in 14 US states. Homosexuality in animals had already been observed countless times, as anyone with 2 male dogs may note. However, the understanding of nature at the time led to it being spoken of in hushed tones, dismissed as a fluke, stricken from official scientific records, or being denied publication in serious journals. With an authority on what constitutes nature officially recognizing animal homosexual behavior, observations flooded in. Purity culture still had a hold on perceptions of homosexuality, though leading to my favourite title, a scientific publication, the 1987 article, A note on the apparent lowering of moral standards in Lepidoptera. Detailing the same-sex encounters of butterflies. Unfortunately, this rigid understanding of what is and is not natural behaviour was parallel in the world of medicine. It is well known that homosexuality and transgenderism were long considered mental illnesses.
Why are Quakers called to honour diversity? We Quakers are a faith community. A faith community, to me, recognises something greater than itself or the sum of its individual members. In deciding what sort of body we are and what we do, we look beyond ourselves to what are described in our advices and queries as the promptings of love and truth. This is why we are called to honour diversity. It is not a practical, reasonable, or even moral choice. It is a calling. As Rainbow Quakers, we find a continuing delight in coming to know and value one another, both in what we have in common and in the distinct gifts each of us has. Precious among these gifts is our identity in relation to gender, orientation, and sexuality. Why can we find a spiritual home in this particular religious body? Why is it the place for our gifts to be offered? Friends describe what we stand for and try to practice as testimony. Strong among our religious testimonies is continuing revelation. This means that if we listen to our calling, if we each and as a body seek to follow the guidance of the Spirit, we can learn more and more, recognizing the limits of our past understanding. As Jesus put it, when the Spirit of truth comes, he will guide you into all the truth. Here is a passage from the Statement of Affirmation and Reconciliation made by our yearly meeting in 1992. Aotearoa New Zealand society, in which we all participate, still assumes heterosexual models of personal and family relationships. We need to understand the part we each play in continuing to weave this single pattern fabric, and to look at ways in which other patterns can be interwoven in order to enrich the whole. The we speaking here has to me the unintended implication that friends are not yet a community including people of the full rainbow diversity, but a community seeking to be open to these people. The Early Meeting's Rainbow Statement of 2023 is more explicitly inclusive. There is hurt and pain among us, and there are voices not yet heard. We recognise that individuals and groups, among us as well as in society in general, have differing life experiences and understanding of sexuality, gender, and identity. This I offer as an example of continuing revelation. Friends came to recognise that a rainbow statement needed to be offered by the rainbow group, that our voice as a group is included in any we spoken by a yearly meeting. I believe that the growth of Quaker understanding of the goodness of rainbow diversity has run parallel with the growth of our sense that we're part of the whole natural world, all life and all that accompanies life, and that we are called to tend and care for it. What has nature to do with the promptings of love and truth? I believe love and truth walk hand in hand. Truth leads us to recognize our innate diversity, along with our innate unity, and that whatever our diverse nature and gifts, we can and do act sometimes rightly and sometimes wrongly. Love guides us to act with the highest respect for one another, to love our neighbour as ourselves. The more we, as a Quaker body, are able to recognise authentic loving relationships in one another, irrespective of sex, gender or orientation, the more we are guided by the partnership of love and truth. We're called not to tolerate diversity, but to honour it. However we understand or experience the spirit, whatever words we use, our Quaker heritage calls us to recognise the inward guide, the guide for each one, which flows into and merges with the guide for us as a community. The diverse gifts of identity in each of us are gifts for the community too. It is our calling to enjoy and to honour them.
As Quakers, we frequently use the light as a metaphor. As time has gone on, so new expressions of LGBTQIA have presented themselves. What if the rainbow community represent a prism that reflects the light into a myriad of different frequencies, each colour of the spectrum representing a different aspect of the light? Can we be open to the wisdom and understanding of all these energy wavelengths? And while they may look separate, in reality, they blend gradually and imperceptibly into their neighbours on each side, and ultimately back into the pure white light from which we all come.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Adrian Skelton aho. And I am Adrian Skelton, I'm a member of the lecture committee. My colleague, your friend, Michael Harcourt is in Wellington, but he's monitoring the chat. There are 45 people listening online, but as yet, no questions there. We've had a very generous lecture, so we've only got time for a couple of questions perhaps, but it would be good to take those from the room. We have a stick microphone with Rick. So we have got just a chance perhaps to clarify some point or two, and we've got the diverse panel, so we might direct that, or we might we can choose who answers. Any questions? Hey.
I'm wondering how you came to decide to make this presentation and to put all your experiences into a Quaker lecture for us.
We were asked. And David James was at that stage on the Quaker lecture, and he had been one who started off the Quaker statement in the first place, and decided he suggested our other speakers, and the reaction from was mainly this group that had worked on the statement. Said, no, we can do it, and did. And we put out an open invitation to anyone else in the Rainbow email list if they wanted to join us. And then when it came to suggestion that maybe we cut it down to a few speakers, none of us were willing to stand by. And, so it has been all those who volunteered, and we did struggle to try and keep it to each to the 5 minutes.
Any other questions from the room? Let's just check the chat. I've just got one concluding question then. Did you enjoy the process? What came out for me was some lovely moments of humour, which always helps. But Anne is going to conclude for us.
Yes, there were moments of humour, but also moments of that brought tears to the eyes. Thank you all for attending this Quaker lecture, and thanks to our Quaker lecture committee who have worked with the Rainbow Group to ensure this lecture happened. I particularly want to honour our presenters for being willing to share some of their lives with us, their personal experiences, their difficult times, their hurts, and their joys. Thank you for making us more aware of your different lived experiences and for showing us what love can do. Ask that you honour and acknowledge our presenters by moving into a time of silence. Thank you.
I feel very moved to sing Taylor.
Terangi Marie Aroha Te Whakapono Terangi Marie Tatawe